Let's evaluate expressions. So consider the expression 3xy minus 8y squared. Evaluate the expression if x equals -2, y equals 5, and z equal 1. So what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite this expression, and instead of each of these variables here, we're going to use the number that's given. X equal -2, so we're going to put a -2 right there. Y equal 5, we're going to put a 5 here and here in place of both of those y values. And z equal 1 means we're going to put a 1 right here. Okay, so evaluating, we have 3 times, instead of x, -2. And then we're going to put the y value right here, so we're going to write a 5 minus 8 times, we're going to put the y value again, so it's going to be a 5. And then z squared, well, z was a 1 squared. So all this means is that instead of that variable, we're going to write that number that's given to us instead. Then we're going to do order of operations. So for order of operations, parentheses, exponents, multiplication or division, whichever comes first from left to right, and addition, subtraction, whichever comes first from left to right. Parentheses or grouping, we don't have really any parentheses. There's a set of parentheses here, but it really pertains to the E, which stands for exponent. So let's do the exponent before we do anything else. So 3 times -2 times 5 minus 8 times 5. Well, if we have 1 squared, that's just a 1. And then M and D in PEMDAS stands for multiplication or division, whichever comes first from left to right. So we can multiply 3 times -2, we get a -6 times 5. Minus 8 times 5 is 40 times 1. So -6 times 5 is a -30. Minus 40. Now we combine those. They have the same sign, which means we add them, and we use the sign that they both have, which is -7. Okay, let's try another one. Evaluate the expression if x equals 4, y equals -1, z equals 0. So instead of this x, we're going to replace that x with a 4. Instead of this y, we're going to write -1. And instead of the z, we're going to write 0. And I forgot a y, this y as well. So we'll have 3 times 4 times -1 minus 8 times -1 times 0 squared. And let's address this exponent first. So we have 3 times 4 times a -1 minus 8 times -1. Well, 0 squared is 0. Okay, then we just continue with our multiplication. 3 times 4, this is a 12 times a -1. And then -8 times the -1 is a +8 times 0. So then we do 12 times the -1 is -12 plus 8 times 0 is 0. We get -12. Let's do another one. Here's a different expression. Consider the expression 2x plus 5y minus 3z equal 2. Okay, if x equals -4, we're replacing this x with a -4. If y is equal to 7, we're replacing that y with a 7. And if z is 6, we replace that z with a 6. So we get 2 times -4 plus 5 times 7 minus 3 times 6. And then we're squaring the whole thing. Remember order of operations. Inside parentheses first, then exponents, then multiplication or division, whichever comes first from left to right. And addition, subtraction, whichever comes first from left to right. So we work inside the parentheses first. And inside the parentheses, we're going to do multiplication. So this is going to be 2 times -4, that's a -8, plus 5 times 7 is 35, and then this one right here, minus 3 times 6, so 6 times 3 is 18, and we have a negative sign, squared. Okay, so that's a multiplication from left to right. We're still working inside the parentheses, so now we're going to do addition, subtraction, whichever comes first from left to right. So looking from left to right, we have -8 plus 35. We're going to tack on the -18 in just a minute. So we get 35 minus 8 is a 27. And if you notice, the sign of 35 is positive. So we're going to use a positive 27. And that comes from combining those two. Then we're subtracting 18, and we're going to square the whole thing. We are still working inside the parentheses, so now we're going to subtract. We're going to do 27 minus 18. We get 9 squared. Well, 9 squared is 81. Okay. Consider the expression 3xy minus 4xz plus 8y. The whole thing is divided by xy squared plus 3z. Evaluate the expression if x equals -2, y equals 5, and z is 1. So again, we're going to replace every x with -2, every y, we're going to write 5 instead, and every z will have 1 instead. So 3 times -2 times 5, okay, because the y is 5 and the x was a -2, minus 4 times x, so now it's a -2, times a z, I'm going to put a 1 right there, plus 8 times y, so 8 times 5. And then we divide the whole thing by xy squared, so x was -2, y is 5, and then plus 3 times z, z was 1. Okay, so let's just check it again. 3xy, so x times y, and then minus 4xz, so x and z, just plugging in those numbers instead, plus 8y, 8 times y. And then x times y squared. Notice the x is -2, the y is 5. Then we're squaring the 5, okay? Plus 3 times z. Then we clean it up. We remember order of operations. Parentheses. Parentheses, like I keep saying, is also anything that is grouping. Like this fraction bar is going to be like your p. We're going to do it the numerator first and the denominator. We're not going to combine any numerators and denominators till we simplify the whole numerator, simplify the whole denominator. Okay, so looking at the numerator, consider the numerator all by itself first. When we consider the numerator, we're going to use the rest of the order of operations. There's no other parentheses or any other grouping symbols. E is for exponents. There's no exponents in the numerator. So then we do multiplication or division, whichever comes first from left to right. So we're going to multiply these, and then we're going to do addition, subtraction. So we're going to get 3 times -2, well, that's a -6, times 5. And -4 times a -2 is a plus 8 times 1, and 8 times 5 is plus 40. Let's do exactly the same thing now with the denominator. Okay, now with the denominator, we have to be careful. If we look, this grouping, group the whole denominator together, there is an exponent. We have to do the exponent first. So we don't do anything with this -2. We're just going to rewrite it. This is -2. And then 5 squared is 25 plus 3 times 1. Okay, now we're going to continue. If you look at your numerator, we're going to keep cleaning that up. Our numerator, we're still going to do multiplication or division. So numerator, we just have multiplication. So -6 times 5 is -30. 8 times 1 is 8 plus 40. Now we're again going to examine the denominator. So we're still at this step, multiplication or division, whichever comes first from left to right. So -2 times 25 is -50, and 3 times 1 is 3. Okay, now we're still going to consider the numerator. So if we consider the numerator, we're going to have -30 plus 8 plus 40. So now we're at this step, addition, subtraction, whichever comes first from left to right. So -30 plus 8. That's going to be 30 minus 8, but we're going to use a negative sign. So 30 minus 8 is 22. We're going to do a -22 plus 40. And then consider the denominator. -50 plus 3, so that's 50 minus 3, which is 47, but we use a negative sign. Okay, now we're still going to clean up the numerator. -22 plus 40, again, we're going to subtract, but we're going to use a positive. We're going to get 18, and 47 is still negative. Okay, and this is as simplified as you can go. Probably you would write this as -18 over 47, or negative of the whole fraction, 18 over 47. So either of these, any of these are correct. Okay, let's try another one. Same expression. Evaluate the expression if x equals 4, y equals -1, and z equals 0. So if x is 4, we're replacing every x with a 4. If y is -1, we're replacing every y with a -1. And if z is 0, replace every z with a 0, and we're going to do it again. So 3 times x, so that's 3 times 4, times y, -1, minus 4 times x, 4 times 4, times z, we get a 0, plus 8 times -1. The whole thing is x, so 4 times y, -1 squared, plus 3 times z, which is 0. Okay, so the z's, there were two places where it is a z, we put a 0 there. X, we have that 4, and this 4, and this 4. And then y's, we plugged in a -1, and a -1, and a -1. Now we're going to clean it up the same way we did a few minutes ago. Okay, so we are going to consider the numerator as this p, this parentheses. Remember, it means grouping as well. So we're going to consider the numerator and denominator as separate groupings. Okay, so in the numerator, we look and we say, well, we have a whole bunch of stuff multiplied together, then it's added or subtracted. So the first thing we do is multiplication or division. So 3 times 4 is 12 times -1. Then we have -4 times 4 is -16 times 0, and 8 times -1 is -8. Then we do the same thing with the denominator. But notice here in the denominator, we have an exponent. So we have to consider that part first because we know the next step is exponents. So 4 times, we have -1 squared, that's -1, times a -1, that's a +1. And then for this piece, we have 3 times 0, that's 0. Okay, now we're still going to consider what's happening in the numerator. So 12 times a -1 is a -12. -16 times 0, that's a 0. And then minus 8. Then we consider the denominator. We have 4 plus 0. So in the numerator we have -12 plus 0, that's -12. 4 plus 0 in the denominator is just a 4. So in the numerator here we have -12 minus 8, that's -20, and we're still dividing by 4. So now the last step is to do this division, -5.